to Becca Murray. So Becca Murray is with Metro North Health. She is a senior research fellow in urologic biofabrication. Now, I know her topic originally was presented as AM in hospitals, but Becca has a really interesting background, and she shifted her presentation to be point of need manufacturing for the defence and hospital experience. So I'll just share a little bit about Becca's, you can see her on the screen there. So Rebecca is a biomedical and materials engineer with 11 years of industry and research experience in biomedical design and engineering, as well as 7 years of experience in 3D printing and materials. After receiving a distinction for her Masters in Biomed Engineering from Oxford University in 2010, Rebecca was awarded a European Marie Curie Research Fellowship to complete her doctorate from Hamburg University of Technology. Rebecca's prior research areas include bioactive glass and 3D printing, as well as shoulder, hip, and spinal implant design. Becca has attracted over $3.3 million in direct funds for a combination of industry-led projects, direct industry funds, government grants, and contract manufacturing projects. She has led many bilateral and multilateral projects with diverse stakeholders, including government, universities, Australian Defence Forces, and industry partners. She is a current Defence Innovation Advisor and was the recipient of the Charles Darwin University College of Engineering, IT, and Environmental Early Career Researcher Award in 2020. And so with that, I would like to welcome Becca to commence presenting on her topic.
Thank you very much, Karen, for the introduction, and thank you for allowing me to speak about some of my experiences that I've had. So for the topic today, I'm going to speak a little bit about my experiences in major medical industry and their impact on shoulder implant design that kind of informed my work in defense, and then now where I am in the hospital setting to do point of care manufacturing. So what are some commonalities between defense and hospitals? They're both very complicated, highly hierarchical organizations. It makes it quite difficult to get anything standard through. There's a rapid and critical need of diverse and sophisticated parts. But one of the things that I think really ties them together is they provide frontline protection. Life hangs in balance. So there's this high risk and high reward for any product you might use there. And so therefore any product must work. And in that case, that is why that's often very highly regulated to make sure that people's lives are protected. So the additive manufacturing vision, as a lot of people know, is that you can make this digital twin, like this digital representation of the product that you want, that can allow for an adaptable digital inventory so that you'll be able to print on demand and also produce just-in-time parts. This can help with obsolescence management, being able to do mass customization of different parts to fit different bodies, and also enhance logistics like the decentralized production. And it's taking off. 3D printing is growing at a CAGR of 17 to 26% over the last 20 years. It's just rapidly expanding. You come to these events, there's something new. You can see from the pictures here, there's applications from art, defense, food production, fashion is what we've been hearing about a lot today, biological printing, there's an ear attached to the little rat there, and also then the defense industry. The reality of 3D printing is there's a lot of promise, a lot of new capability that you can do, but with anything new, you also have the unknown and also different defects. You got heat with the laser production that slows the process down. You then have post-processing, you got layer defects. All these things are part of the process and learning that you need to do to overcome. And it's being done by innovation every day. So it's new, there's new technology, new advantages that each of the new technologies bring, new applications that also have to be discovered. And in this process has to be developed for each of the technologies. You also have to minimize risk to people, to companies. So there's a drive to open paths for use. And in order to be able to have these use, and especially in the critical industry where lives are at stake, there has to be a fundamental building of trust that the technology works, that you can understand how it works, that you can control the process. And in order to do this, you need time, you need effort to build it, you need examples of what to do, you need to teach people how, you need to innovate in the space, and then really provide that evidence in order for these parts to be used in that critical industry. And for me, there's a lot of different inputs to this, but some of the core bits are the design that you want to use and the technology and how it merges with the materials that enable it to happen. And the people have to be upskilled. So you have to train the people, you have testing to be done to learn. And at the heart of all this, what you can do, in my opinion, the best thing you can do is just try things. So case studies. So make a plan of what you want to do. Go do it, make the model, do the 3D printing, use the object that you are making, and in that process, do testing, do R&D, do innovation, check process parameters so you can learn and then apply that learning and you adapt your product. And this is what 3D printing is all about. You get customization in this way, you're going to be building and you're innovating in that space. So case studies, to me, are at the heart of what's driving this big uptake in 3D printing and what it's all about. So it's quite different from the major medical industry experience. I was a research and development engineer at a company called Ceramtech. They have a ceramic medical product that is like a major market leader in the ceramic orthopedic implant. For hip implants, it provided over 99% of the hip ball heads to all the major medical manufacturers, Zimmer, Biomet, Stryker, all of them. It's because the material is quite structurally good, hardware, and it's excellent. And so the Ceramtech was looking to take this material and use it in different applications. So my job was to make it into the shoulder. And so I was working on multiple different series with a couple different major companies to get their designs transferred to ceramic. But in that process, what came up was kind of cool. There was a patient-specific shoulder. There was a lady that was allergic to almost all the metals. You couldn't find a bearing surface that would work. So our customer approached us and said, can you make this patient-specific one? And so in that process, we had to redesign their design. We had to do all the testing we would have done for a major implant. We had to develop the paperwork for it because we'd never done it for a single patient before. We worked with the surgeons to make sure it would make sense. Did the product specification and marking. And then in the end, quite excitingly, it was the first implant ever implanted by our group. It was a shoulder put into a patient, and they had a satisfied patient and a happy surgeon, which is always a great thing to hear. What I saw from this is that this process was a miniature engineering design process just for that one implant. And I was like, how can you get that scalable? And for anything that is quite an extensive process, having a really good framework is very important. So additive manufacturing has some development frameworks that are being implemented. One of them is from DNV. It's here, you can find it, and they've summarized quite nicely the different inputs and how they can affect an AM part. They have good processes on how they can certify parts, but these frameworks from these organizations and multinationals are very important so that you can go from an applications-driven certification process in medical to a more, you certify the process so you can have an adaptable end product and you just check that it meets the end goals. So this leads into my defense part. So I worked as the director of the Advanced Manufacturing Alliance at Charles Darwin University. I'm also the Defense Innovation Advisor for Australian Defense. So you have a completely different setting here than the medical industry. It's remote. You have very complicated logistics. You only have what's at your doorstep. You've got very sophisticated equipment, a rapid and critical need for diverse parts and demanding applications, and again, that high risk. So there's a need to have a functional and adaptable technology. The Army had identified 2 technologies they wanted to try, a basic FDM, Creality, and then a new technology based on cold spray called Speed 3D. So they also how do you start working on process scoping and building? The people they had were regular soldiers, and so they didn't have training in this space. CDU worked with them and the startup company Speed3D. CDU developed the training and process development to build skills and know-how. We worked on assessing feasibility and benefit, but we really worked on those real-world applications as case studies. We had defense identify what their actual need was, where there were areas they needed something to make. We worked with them to assess feasibility and the benefit to them and how to quantify what could the benefit be. We worked on design and print and then summarize the evidence because you have to have that digital trace. The first part was quite more standard, a structured theory and delivery of a practical project, 2 to 3 week time frame, design and fabricate a simple part, build the digital trace and test for evidence. But we did this in a little different way. We built our own micro-credentials, so a suite of 6 different ones for each of the different topics that we were teaching in that course. What was great about this is they're very easy to assemble. You could a student might only be able to accomplish 3 rather than 6. And we also made different levels. So for that course that was very structured, is level 1. But the thing about micro-credentials is they're shorter. It's a really relatively new way of recognizing the skills and knowledge. They're more targeted, they're rapidly developing, and it's a really good way of adapting and making knowledge more accessible and allowing people to get recognized for that learning. The next step is we went into case studies. So we went the whole process from CAD modeling, making the plan, to simulation, to printing, to final part. They're starting with the actual identification of the case studies. And when we were doing this, where do you think we actually performed the case studies? Normally you do it in a quite controlled setting, but when Army, they decided, let's take it out to the field. And so we were in middle of the Northern Territory bush, so in middle of Australia. And they decided to load the printer up on the back and see if it could be deployed, because the technology is not useful if you can't actually take it to where it needs to be. And so the first test was taking the printer out there and making sure it worked. And then the second field trial that we did is we did all the steps. So we did designing. You can see there a soldier working on the modeling, also with our engineer, Matt. And you can see the simulation and the design process there. The printing, you can see here, this is actually using, talking about with the robot arm used to catch this powder that's being sprayed at 3 times the speed of sound. And you can build up to about 80 kilogram parts with this really big machine. And so they were able to print and post-process. And here's some of the different parts that we made. So that's from a piece from an armored vehicle. The other is a BSM mount and a gunner's ratchet, which I'll talk about in a moment. But not just the creating of the parts, the CNC machining of the parts, the heat treating of the parts. We also implemented our entire materials research line that we were doing. So we've got a paper on the aluminum 6061 printing, but we got our tensile tester out there, the powder mixing. That there in the picture is the first tensile piece we made out field, and we pulled the sample. And so we were able to verify the material that we made out field to make sure it still performed like it did in the kind of traditional setting. So one of this is the BSM mount. So it replaced a cast aluminum mount that was a fleet-wide issue. It had defective area that kept breaking. So it was 48 minutes to print 2 of them. That did require some CNC machining. As you can see, they printed it in aluminum, but this one here was printed in aluminum bronze. Here's a gunner's ratchet. What was great about this is it replaced a part that had a 12-month lead time. When you're out field and your gun isn't working, you can't wait 12 months for it. So this allowed you to have an off-the-shelf ratchet mechanism and attached to it. We also were challenged by the Navy to make a 2-inch cam lock for an Armadale class Navy patrol boat. We also did take them through training later. We had to make sure it met material military specification. So we looked up the different mil spec there, it's listed, and classified all the different steps we needed to do and tested towards each of those. And in the end, we even did an extra field test, and you got that picture of me shooting the water cannon, but it passed every test there. So in a short time frame, within 10 months, we were able to complete 32 case studies with Army alone, with all the paperwork behind it. We were able to see that there's an initial process to check which additive manufacturing capabilities might work. Can you check the components in the design? We were able to upskill the people. This was actually really cool. The everyday soldiers were able to go through the process, and not all of them, from 16 that started, 7 really went through the entire process and went through the case studies and really enjoyed that process and getting to use their skills. So I was excited to get back into medical. Like defense was really cool. There was a lot of excellent applications, but my passion has always been in the medical arena. So I took an opportunity to come to Brisbane as a senior research fellow in neurological biofabrication. While I was here, though, they were doing some 3D printing and providing some anatomical models to some of the clinics. And so we wanted to make this a product that we could use. And so here you can see the anatomical models. You take the 2D scans from CT or MRI, and you make a virtual model, a 3D model, and then you can print that. These have reported benefits of increasing the patient's understanding of their disease, reducing their anxiety. It enhances student and surgeon training. It supports the surgeons in their planning. And for my particular area, it was shown to reduce the positive margin rate, so reduce leaving cancer behind. So it has quite a wide-ranging benefits. So we were looking to unlock these benefits through point-of-care manufacture here on site in a 24 to 48-hour time frame. But we ran into a couple of regulatory hurdles. So prior to February 2021, these models were exempt based on custom-made exemption, and that's what we were using to provide it. But since February 2021, they've moved to a Class 2A patient-matched medical device. And so these are medical devices, they're regulated, we have to meet their criteria. So what does that mean? We have to meet the essential principles, we have to produce them under a quality assurance framework, and then be included in the ARTG. So these increased regulatory requirements are profoundly affecting all health services in Australia, and because we don't have the system set up. And so this is quite a large hurdle to overcome. So I used the stuff I learned from the major medical industry, working in German manufacturing, which is top of the line, as well as at patient specific, and then going through the essential principles and the regulations. The regulations are over thousands of pages, and so these essential principles checklist was a refreshing 28, and it summarizes the regulations in a way that you can really approach. Combine that with some of the other ISO standards. So what do you need? It depends. Everything about this is risk-based, so you have to do your own risk assessment on your product, but for some of them, they're quite clear. For anatomical models, it was quite clear as a 2A now. But the sponsor, the people making it, have to determine it. And so you have to give, so in the documentation process, it's one of the main things that you have to do. You always have to document the rationale for why you do it, the date, who made it, document versions. And so we use the ISO 13485 format for that. And in that, we created a technical file documentation. It refers to all the documents that a medical device manufacturer has to submit to a certifying body. The technical file is required in order to get certification. So basically, it's a lot of papers, a lot of evidence, a lot of all your testing summarized in a way that can be reviewed and shows that you have actually conformed to the regulations. So anatomical models, what are they? For us, they defined them as a medical device. So once we know that, then you have to define them in terms of your regulation. So TGA, it's a patient-matched device. has a GMDN code that we found. You have to determine the risk level, and then we had to define who's going to make it, who's going to take that liability, who's going to work on it, and both of those are Metro North. You get that, you're like, where do I start? So always for me, it's with a plan. So I've designed a device based off 13485 to support conformity. It's called the design plan. Looked at the essential principles checklist, performed a risk assessment according to the ISO standard, and that's the best place to start. It gets you understanding what design, what your requirements are, where you need to go with regulation. So in the end, we came out with a HPI, technical file documentation framework, that consists of 11 documents that plan out the whole process. We are also in the process, we've got kind of a buy until 2024 to get the full quality management system up and running. And so we're working towards that at the moment. We've got 53 documents, we've got patients matched, device documents particularly. We're building the SOPs, but one of the cool things is we've got the custom-made anatomical model listed. We've got a framework that we can use. We're implementing the QMS, and we are currently supplying our clinical departments with patient-matched anatomical models. You can see there at the right, the first one we delivered. And so we've got a pretty good max facts department and orthopedics group that provide some of these anatomical models. They pre-bend surgical plates around it. It reduces operation time. It actually then really conforms to the anatomy. The surgeons get a better fit. One particular case study is this person had a very large tumor up on its mandible, and it needed a free flap reconstruction. So basically they take a part of the bone from another area of the body, either the tibia, which isn't preferred, or the scapula. And here it was really challenging because it was such a big defect, and the scapula also had a really weird anatomical deformation at the bottom, a weird point. And so the modelers were able to work with the surgeons to design where to cut the scapula here to transfer it into the mandible, and also plan the cuts to the mandible in order to make sure that that free flap would fit and that the person would have a jaw that could look fairly normal at the end and also function well, which is the main part. Successful. So the framework that we're building on, so we're actively participating in the regulatory environment because it's rapidly changing. We're starting to measure our clinical impact and integration. And this is a strong framework that we're really building the different devices. We've already extended to radiation therapy boluses and brachytherapy devices. So what does all of this experience kind of lead down to? For me, it's evidence and trust building. So through that, I think, again, the heart is the case study. Show your examples. And what is a good case study? You can actually do it. It's feasible. It brings value to the organization you're working for, and it provides capability and function. The documentation of the evidence is really key. It must be streamlined. You must be able to do it. It has to be quick in order to get the turnaround. And each device is then checked for form, fit, and function. Building consensus frameworks are really important. So not just one company doing it on its own, that you can do it internationally. So I actually sit on the ISO TC 261 additive manufacturing, and then one particularly that works with medical devices. And the things that I've learned is that in order to get a 3D printing up and running, you need to have an organization willing to take considered risk and also make the investment, the time and money investment. And you have to have people engaged and want to take part and just start working towards it and be able to work through unknown situations. It's really hard when you're like, where do I start? This hasn't been done before. They're making new classifications. But as long as you provide reason and document what you're doing, typically you can keep talking and working around what is a better solution. And so the process is big, it's iterative. You'll come back to the beginning. And through that process, you'll build trust, knowledge, and know-how. And that is the way you'll build evidence. And so the kind of take homes I have are 3D printing is actually currently being utilized in critical defense. Its full uptake is going to depend on building that level of trust And building that level of trust can be really helped by that certification process. And just don't get lost in the paperwork. It's a lot, but it's important because it's high risk and it's high reward to patients' lives, and it can affect and change them for the better. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
I got to see firsthand some of the amazing work that you do in 3D. You really kicked a lot of goals that other organisations and teams haven't been able to do, so kudos to you for that. And I really do hope that you have the same success in your new role within the hospital and health sector. Now, we do have a question here, if I may. So, has your research investigated the impacts of material stiffness of implants to the effects of bone loss around the implant and osseointegration?
Yes. So my particular research, I guess my first part was in bioactive glasses, and it was for a glass that would coat titanium, and so it would improve the osseointegration of implants. That, for me, my 3D printing work hasn't touched on that issue. I know one of the pictures I showed on 3D printing taken off is the trabecular metal that has been developed. That's, I think, usually made with EBM process. And it shows such good osseointegration so that the bone grows into the implant, which is what they wanted to make sure the implant stayed where it was. But it grew in too well that the surgeons actually couldn't remove it when they needed to. And so they had to actually redesign it so it didn't quite integrate that well. But my work hasn't crossed into that area yet, I would say. Yeah.
And maybe one last question, if that's okay. Why did you decide to present for us here at TIPE?
I decided to present because a lot of the areas I've worked, I've been the only female. Like sitting in on like the defense meetings, I was the only one in a technical role or a leading role. And I think it's just really important to show some images and to provide stories, and to, like, here I'm the only one at my level working on the ground in the engineering aspect that's female. And so I think it's really important to have examples of it working. Again, case studies, maybe I'm just all about examples. So I think it's just really important to have that known, and I would love to talk with people. If you have any questions, ideas, I like to work together. I love collaboration. So just to kind of get that presence out there.